A new poll finds most U.S. citizens think the military should impose
very
even greater restrictions on the
This is
reporting
me on
of the war in the Persian
CNN
Gulf.
during the beginning of the bombing of Iraq in January
Center for the People and the Press.
1991.
More than 900 adults were asked whether they thought the military should exert more control over how news organizations
see how it
report
looks,
on the war.
and it has an irradiated look to it, which is kind of perfect in my opinion. I kind of like
on the
it.
war should be left up
Sort of
to news
Richard
organizations.
Linklater kind of a look, but anyway, here we go.
Nearly 80% said they do not think the military is hiding bad news. Similarly, 72% said they believe news organizations are trying to give an objective picture of the war. We have two experts joining us now for a closer look at the role of the media in reporting the war. Dennis Perrin is a staff member for fairness and accuracy in reporting. He is at our bureau in New York. And in Washington, we are joined by Reed Irvine. He is chairman of the Board for Accuracy in Media. Mr. Irvine, we'll start with you. A lot of criticism coming in. I assume you've been able to see the letters that we've been sharing on CNN, that the reporting could damage or hurt the troops in the Gulf. What do you think?
Well, that's a possibility, but I'm much more concerned about the reporting damaging or hurting the morale and the support that the people here and in other countries are giving to this effort. This was the biggest damage that was done in Vietnam. It was not so much security as it was that over the years, the media eroded the domestic morale and the support for the effort, and the end was that 58,000 Americans died in vain because we lost.
How so? Is that intentional, or is it just by the fact of reporting news that's depressing by the war?
Well, a lot of it was intentional because we had a lot of reporters in Vietnam that were opposed to the war effort, and they made no bones about it. However, some of it was simply by the nature of the beast, that the reporters want to report everything they possibly can, and in war there's a lot of nasty things going on, like people getting killed. And one of the things that happened here, when the Pentagon put out guidelines that said they weren't going to allow you folks on television to show American soldiers wounded and in agony, the media let up a scream and said, oh, that's terrible. War is horrible. We've got to be able to show how horrible it is. We've got to put all that blood and gore on the screen. Well, that's exactly the kind of thing that was done in Vietnam that turned people against supporting the boys on the field.
Mr. Perrin, your thoughts?
Well, I think the media has jumped on the pro-war bandwagon from the very beginning. When the bombs began dropping on Baghdad on the 16th, you saw retired generals and conservative policy analysts coming on, pointing at maps, exulting over so-called surgical strikes against Iraq, and so on and so forth. Add to this the joy that a lot of anchors and commentators were displaying about the war. You had Tom Brokaw talking about that he hoped it would be a short and sweet war. You had Jim Stewart on CBS saying that he was looking at picture-perfect assault on Iraq. This isn't reporting, this is boosterism, this isn't journalism, this is cheerleading. And this is what we've seen from the beginning. You won't see dissident policy analysts with any consistency on American television the way you see conservative military analysts and the way that you see retired generals who are for the war. There's a greater diversity on foreign television, I might say, like in Britain and Canada, Germany and France, greater diversity of views about what's happening in the Gulf than there is in the United States.
As you both know, we're operating under heavy censorship from the Israeli government, the Saudi government, the U.S. military, and we continue to tell folks, and the Iraqi government, of course, as well, we continue to tell folks with the disclaimer that we are under censorship. What else might we do to get that point across, in your opinion, Mr. Irvine, and do you think the censorship is necessary or excessive?
You mean their censorship or our censorship?
Oh.
We don't have any, of course. Well, of course.
Well, we are under censorship from the U.S. military.
Out in Saudi Arabia, yeah. The censorship that we're imposing is for security reasons, and that is absolutely necessary. I think what you can do, however, when you're reporting from Saudi Arabia, or excuse me, from Iraq, is to not report things like that baby milk factory that Peter Arnett described, which turned out to be a biological weapons factory. He had plenty of reason to be dubious about that. Your own reporters were dubious about it when they went to look at it last August. And he should simply, if he's under censorship, he should simply refuse to go on with that report. I mean, he is, look, I have to tell you, CNN has become the voice of Baghdad with Peter Arnett there, doing for Saddam Hussein what Tokyo Rose and Lord Haha were doing for Hitler and the Japanese in World War II. And as a World War II combat veteran, I just find that outrageous.
Mr. Perrin, your thoughts on censorship?
Well, I think it's outrageous in general about the censorship. Robert Fisk, who's a reporter for the British newspaper The Independent, bolted the pool in Saudi Arabia and went to the border of Saudi Arabia and Kuwait to see what was going on, and he found soldiers who weren't that up for going in. They knew that they were going to die. A lot of them knew they were going to die. He had to give a map to a tank commander because they didn't have any maps. And this isn't the kind of reporting that we're seeing. On this side of the Atlantic, we're seeing the kind of reporting that more or less accepts the war as proper, accepts everything that Bush says as being true, and you're not having any real skepticism.
Well,
and in the meantime, you have an anti-war movement that not only in this country, but across the world, that is only kept in short sound bites. But the anti-war leaders and dissident policy critics are not being brought indoors to sit at the table of experts and discuss the reasons for this war. And that's a form of censorship as well.
All right, let me give each of you gentlemen a quick chance to tell me what you think would be the best way to operate then. And even if you can include CNN, since we're a global network, what kind of problems that poses for us, including having a correspondent in Iraq, Peter Arnett, who is under Iraqi government censorship.
Well, let me say this. Mr. Perrin's prescription is a prescription for defeat. He is obviously opposed to the war, and he wants to be able to use your network and all the other networks in the news media to do Saddam Hussein's job of undermining the morale. And that's a prescription for defeat.
So how would you change that? What would you do differently?
Listen to this.
I would certainly not. What we need to do is have some boosterism. If you're going to send 500,000 young men off to die, you've got to give them support. And the least the media in this country can do is make some sacrifices to support the war effort. Otherwise, don't get into the war. Don't do it if you can't give them that kind of support. Otherwise, you're just going to waste their time and their lives.
Mr. Perrin.
I don't feel I'm doing Saddam Hussein's job. I feel I'm part of a great American tradition, and that's called dissent. And we've had dissent in this country since the beginning of the Republic in various forms, and I feel that's a great American tradition.
I'm such a liberal here.
I think that I don't think that it's doing Iraqi propaganda any good to show opposition to the war. And what could have been avoided, I think. I think that if the press had allowed on more anti-war arguments before this happened, the American people might have got a broader view of what the history was leading up to this tragedy and what to expect. And now we're in the middle of it. I don't think that a press should voluntarily, especially in a free country, act as a state press, which is the prescription we've just heard. We should have an independent, aggressive, journalistic press. And reporters should act independent of the state. And if you don't have that, then what's the point of having an independent media?
In that case, forget about fighting any wars, because a democratic society operating under your rules will never be able to win a war against a dictatorship like Saddam Hussein, who controls everything, who has complete boosterism and support. And Saddam Hussein, Mr. Perrin, thanked you last night in that interview with Peter Arnett. Didn't you get the message? He said, boy, you're doing a great job, you are sublime, you're terrific. And that's the message that he's sending to America.
All right, well, I have to cut you off. I'm sorry. We are completely out of time, gentlemen. Thanks so much to the both of you for joining us.
Reader Irvine gets the first and last word and slimes me as pro-Saddam.
We'll be back in a minute.
That's the liberal media for you.